Coming down the aisle, it's WrestlePedia with your host, the savant of the squared circle, the Rayman of wrestling. It's Brody, the insane brain Herman.
Welcome back, folks, to WrestlePedia with Brody, the insane brain Herman, the savant of the squared circle, the Rayman of wrestling. And I, of course, am his father, known as the dad. On today's podcast, on today's episode, we are going to count down the 5 most despised figures in the history of professional wrestling. And of course, Brody has done his study. He's been watching wrestling since he was a small child and has an encyclopedic brain on this. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Yes.
Okay, so here's what we're going to do. I understand, listen, all lists are kind of subjective, although I think you make a good case here. And I don't know nearly as much, so I'm going to have a bunch of questions along the way.
Sure, you will.
What I want to encourage people to do is if you disagree or if you agree, you want to leave something in the comments, that's fine. If you want to send him an email, he can be reached at brody@theinsanebrain.herman, that's BRODY, at theinsanebrain.herman, and he will personally respond to all of your emails. So Brody, without any further ado, let's get rolling. You know, wrestling is filled with heroes and
villains in the ring.
And villains.
In the ring.
Villains in the ring, but also despised figures outside
of the ring, yes.
So when we're talking about today, we're talking about despised figures. Are we talking about anywhere in wrestling or just wrestlers?
Not wrestlers, but more despised figures outside of the ring, but in the office.
Outside. So we will cover the best heels.
Yes, we will.
On another episode.
Yes, we will.
So today's episode is going to focus specifically on despised figures in the wrestling world.
Yes,
but not wrestlers themselves.
No.
Well, this is real specific. This will be a lot of fun. Why don't we go ahead and get started with number 5 on your list? Who do you got?
Number 5, a lot of people cite him, John Laurinaitis. He's the brother of Road Warrior Animal, part of one of the greatest tag teams of all time in the Road Warriors. And he started off as a wrestler in WCW for the Dynamic Dudes with Shane Douglas, and then he worked in Japan a lot. But this is kind of where things, kind of become an office career for him. He gets hired back in WCW in 1999 and ends up taking over as the head booker of WCW in October 2000. It was kind of a dying ship by that point. We'll talk about two despised figures of why that is later on. But
let's talk about with John Laurinaitis. Why is he despised?
He is despised because when he went to the WWE, he took over talent relations in 2004 from Jim Ross, who is a beloved talent figure's head. And when you're the talent relations figure, you're the executioner, as they call in professional wrestling, the bearer of bad news. So when you get a call from Johnny Laurinaitis...
So he got rid of a lot of people.
Yeah.
Who did he get rid of that people were like, oh my God, I can't believe he got rid of him?
Well, that's Vince's call. John Laurinaitis just makes the phone call. But RVD, Matt Hardy, a variety of wrestlers that have been released by John Laurinaitis. Just guys that, maybe were unfairly released. A lot of developmental guys that he gave up on that are doing well now, like Lance Archer or... Sami Callihan. He had a bad one. Here's a funny thing about John Laurinaitis before I dive into this. He hired the wrong one-legged wrestler. He actually, that was the idea, was they were trying to hire Zach Allen, who ended up being a great competitor in American Ninja Warrior, but he didn't find the right Zach Allen, who had one leg. Instead, he found the wrong one-legged wrestler.
And was he also named Zach Allen?
No, I don't believe
I was going to say, because that would have been an unbelievable coincidence if there had been two one-legged wrestlers by the same name. You almost couldn't blame him for that mistake. Let me ask you this. If he is the 5th most despised person, who do you think, if anybody, who despises him the most? Does he have one arch enemy who would put him number 1 on his list?
No, he doesn't really have
his general impact on the wrestling world.
He's just his general impact on the wrestling world as an executioner fellow type. If you get a call from John Laurinaitis at a certain point in time. And of course, he's a general manager.
Every business has got a guy like that.
Right.
He's the guy you don't want to see him on a Friday afternoon walk by your office or cubicle and call you in because it's not going to end well.
Right.
Good news never comes at the end of a payday on a Friday.
No.
If you're being called into to HR.
Yeah.
Let's move on to number 4. Who do you have at number 4?
Well, this guy, Zed Ferrara, of course, he has to be mentioned because, he was the henchman of our most despised wrestling figure we'll talk about later on. But he was one of the first writers WWE really ever had in the late 90s, and he was kind of, he was just associated with disease in the wrestling business. He was associated with it, and he ended up, portraying Oklahoma, which was a mockery, in my opinion, of one of the greatest wrestling announcers of all time, Jim Ross's Bell's palsy, and, Turner got that off the air. And though, he didn't really make a lot of decisions, but he was associated and diseased and credited with a lot of just bad stuff that's happened in the wrestling business. Ed Ferrara is just that guy, and, a lot of people, personally.
For those who don't know, talk about that incident, the Bell's palsy incident.
Jim Ross, he was a great wrestling announcer, and he had Bell's palsy, and that's a paralyzation in the face, and it's only temporary; it's not permanent. But it was a topical thing, and of course, the most despised figure in wrestling we'll talk about later, and Ed Ferrara capitalized, and Ed Ferrara portrayed the character on national television to mock the other wrestling company, WWE. It was WCW. They jumped ship from the WWE in a raid. We'll talk about.
I mean, that's pretty despicable. Because that's anybody that might be suffering from that at home, they probably also felt like they were being made
so despicable.
fun of.
Cornette spat at him in his face. So that's how despicable.
There you go.
That's all you need.
Usually you have to. Usually you have to do something pretty despicable.
I mean, not only that, he's the goofball that poured barbecue sauce in a female wrestler's cleavage on television because he was so upset and wanted to make it better. This is the guy we're talking about.
That's not appropriate. That's degrading.
Yeah, it's degrading.
You don't
he's
put
a demeaning guy.
Barbecue sauce onto a woman like that.
Yeah.
You use barbecue sauce on ribs.
Yeah, he wasn't doing on any ribs.
I think it would be delicious.
JR's barbecue sauce, that was kind of the angle there.
You want to put it on. You could barbecue a turkey.
Yeah.
But fellas out there, let's try to be gentlemen.
Yeah, can't we?
You don't put that on a woman without her consent.
Yeah.
If this is something she requested, that's a totally other story.
Yeah,
but
this was
not by her request.
No.
Well,
no.
there you go. There's number 4 on the list. Let's move to number 3 on the list.
Well, here we go.
Despised
figures.
Yes.
You gotta go number 3, the native St. Louis himself. Believe me, we do not own anything. We are not proud to have him as a native St. Louisan, but Jim Herd, of course.
Jim Herd.
Yeah, you don't like that.
Why so despised?
He's gotta be, some people will call him number 1 on the list. He is target enemy number 1 to where his address isn't even public. This guy is targeted, and we'll talk a lot about him here. Jim Herd started off in the wrestling business in the 60s, and then he worked for KPLR and worked with the St. Louis Wrestling Club with Sam Muchnick and Larry Natizik, and worked in KPLR with guys like Ted Koppler. And of course, he was fired from there, and he ended up working as a regional manager at a Pizza Hut. But this is where things get interesting. In 1989, WCW was bought by Ted Turner in November of '88, and Jack Petrick and Jim Herd were friends at the time, and their wives were friends, and he puts Jim Herd in charge of this wrestling company. And man, this is actually a real quote. Vince McMahon says, "The poor job that Jim Herd did is how I won the war." Jim Herd was a horrible, horrible man to be in charge of wrestling, created so many bad gimmicks. I mean, we'll talk about those a lot, but the ding-dongs,
I like to always ask, is there one person in particular that despises him the most?
There are about 3 or 4 people.
And who are they?
Ric Flair, Kevin Sullivan, Jim Cornette. The people really had to sit in that booking committee room and really had to deal with Jim Herd on a daily basis. It was horrifying. They were against Jim Herd. He is a very, very, very despised figure in professional wrestling and really damaged wrestling. Actually, there was a letter written to him as somebody resigned, says, "I hope you die to a horrible death of crotch rot in front of your family and a horrible death." And
who amongst us hasn't gotten a letter like that?
Yeah,
worth mentioning here before we get to number 2.
No, not to mention when he resigned, when he was fired from WCW, somebody from Turner sent him black flowers to his office of how despised of a figure he was.
Don't think it's easy to get black flowers.
No, but Jim Herd achieved.
I've never seen them grow in the wild. I think you have to paint them. For those of you who are lucky enough to be watching the video version of this podcast, I think it's worth mentioning that I have cut my beard down into a Hulk Hogan style mustache at your request.
Yeah.
And I was really hoping that I would look very much like Hogan, but as I'm looking at myself on the camera with this hat, I feel like I look a little bit more like Grandpa Joe from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate
Might
Factory.
be right. Well,
look at me.
Yeah.
Doesn't it seem like that a little bit? I feel like I should be singing that Golden Ticket song.
Yeah, well, this guy next provides a lot of golden tickets to wrestlers.
All right, well, he's keeping us because I run afoul a little bit. So, okay, let's get back on The number 2 despised figure in the history of wrestling.
You can love him or hate him, but of course it's the kingmaker of all professional wrestling and Vince McMahon.
Vince McMahon. Now this is a surprise to me because I assumed he would be number 1 on your list. So I don't know who number 1 on your list is going to be, but talk about Vince. And I think it's going to bother him that he's number 2 on your list.
It's not going to bother him.
And not number 1. Don't you think he's going to want to be number 1?
No,
anyway, go ahead.
We'll talk about him.
Why is he number 2 on your list?
He's number 2 because he's the man. He's known as. The McMahons are the Walt Disneys of professional wrestling. The family of the McMahons, WWE starting in the 50s with Jess McMahon, then Vince McMahon Sr., and then of course Vince McMahon Jr. Since his death in 1984, he's instrumental in the propel push of Hulk Hogan. But of course, with wrestlers, it's a love-hate relationship with Vince. If you don't push me to the top of the mountain, I'm going to be made the king of wrestling. And when wrestlers talk about figures they just don't like, it's Vince McMahon. Any wrestler that's not in the main event doesn't like Vince McMahon.
Yeah, but is that fair? I mean, not everybody can be in the main event.
Right.
Everybody wants to be champion. And
sure.
don't wrestling fans owe a tremendous debt to Vince McMahon?
Sure they do.
He basically built professional wrestling into what it is
today.
What it is today,
yeah.
How many WrestleManias have there been?
I think we're going on like 37. It's
37 WrestleManias. I remember WrestleMania number 1. I think it was in 1984.
1985.
85?
85.
Who was it? I remember
the main
Mr.
event,
T
and Hulk Hogan versus Paul Orndorff and Roddy Piper, the first main event of WrestleMania, a tag team match, which was very unusual back then, but Vince went with it. I'm sure.
I was like 13, turning 14 that year.
Yeah.
I remember it pretty well.
Yeah, Mr. Wonderful.
And we're going to do subsequent episodes on the greatest WrestleManias and the greatest matches of all time. But let's get back to Vince. So I've made a little case for why he should probably be the most loved figure in wrestling because without him it doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist the way it is now. No.
Who would you say despises him the most?
Would probably be every wrestling promoter that he screwed out of. Vern Gagne despises Vince the most. Probably guys. Jim Barnett for letting go, and we'll talk about Jim Barnett. We can do a whole episode on Jim Barnett. We will at some point in this series. So many figures, just George Scott and so many others that were fired by Vince who, lost their jobs because of Vince, all the promoters that he bought out. Paul Bosch hates Vince the most, his dying words. He hated Vince McMahon. A lot of big names in wrestling hate Vince McMahon.
To me, that really says something because, you got to select your dying words pretty carefully.
Yeah.
You only get to have one set of dying words.
Yeah.
So for your dying words to point out your hatred for somebody,
yeah,
that brings me back to my original point on why he's not number 1 on the list. So let's get to number 1 on the list.
We'll get number 1.
Who is the most despised man in the history of wrestling, or woman?
This despised figure is hated by big names in wrestling we talked about, and that's Vince Russo. It's got to be number 1 on the list.
Vince Russo.
Vince Russo will talk about how he started. He was a magazine editor, and he ran a video store back when those existed, and he became a writer for WWE. His first big idea, of course, was actually... This was going to be legitimate, guys. WrestleMania was going to be Fred Goldman versus O.J. Simpson, and Fred Goldman got to choose what weapon he would use against O.J. That was Vince Russo's idea. And Vince
never happened.
Never happened. Vince McMahon actually
I'm not sure if that was the smartest idea.
Well, Vince McMahon liked having Vince Russo around in the beginning when he did the 3 Faces of Foley when Mick Foley did different characters. He was a nice writer for a little bit. Then, of course, things went south. Him and Jim Cornette didn't go. If you talk about arch enemy number 1 for Vince Russo, it's Jim Cornette or Vince McMahon. We'll talk about that in a second. Vince Russo is just a fountain. Jim Herd and Vince Russo are both fountains of bad ideas. When you associate
almost fountain of bad ideas,
and associate anything with Vince Russo, it's bad. It's just bad ideas. He's the one that brought Ed Ferrara into the wrestling business. More virus in it, and he just didn't make it better. One of the worst things, Vince McMahon, of course, didn't like him bringing the Whack Pack on for WWE. That was not a Vince McMahon liking. He's still bitter about that, and of course, Vince Russo, Ed Ferrara, and Terry Taylor, that's the thing about Vince Russo. He's a gang of henchmen around him, too, that make him, so lethal. And, of course, he jumps to the opposition of WCW. And, of course, to talk about figures like Jim Herd, Vince Russo, and John Laurinaitis, read a book called When Fools Rushed In, and then the Guy Evans Nitro book are 2 great books talking about this fully in depth. I've read both of them. They're great. Vince Russo jumps over in October of 1999 to WCW. He takes it over, and, man, You want to talk about the iceberg of the wrestling business. If WCW had any momentum in the ship, he was the iceberg that made it sink. Boy, the ideas that he came up with, Judy Bagwell on a forklift, Viagra on a pole, just bad ideas. He made himself the champion. That just shows Vince McMahon has made himself the champion for his own ego, but Vince Russo copied him in doing it. When a promoter makes himself the champion, it shows you what type of character he is, and Vince Russo is just not good. Any bad idea in wrestling, you can almost, I mean, even that, when fans chant fire Russo, even the fans despise him just as much as Vince McMahon for him leaving his ship.
What are the statistical odds that the two top names on your list would both be named Vince?
Yeah, well, it's
not that popular of a name.
Yeah, they're both from Connecticut. It works out.
Wow, how do you like that?
Connecticut or New York?
What was going on in Connecticut? That I think it's probably
New York.
When you hear Vince, I almost think of an Italian name, but McMahon obviously is an Irish name.
Yeah, big Irish fellow.
But Russo is an Italian.
Yeah, he's from New York. He's from near Connecticut, though. But yeah, that's kind of... I mean, when you talk about two despised figures and you don't mention Vince McMahon and Vince Russo and Jim Herd and a lot of the names we mentioned, I mean, those guys...
Now, was there any other name that you had a hard time keeping off this list, but they just didn't make the top 5?
No, I mean, those are the despised figures of wrestling. When you refer to, like, the big 5 of wrestling, you got to refer to those 5.
Do you feel like there's any future stars in the world of being despised? Anybody who's maybe done a couple of things so far, but they still can do a lot of destruction?
Not really. I mean, I'm sure there will be some in the future. There always are in bad idea makers of wrestling, but those are the ones that you pretty much associate with just bad ideas and bad innovations and despised figures in professional wrestling.
Well, there you have it, folks. Now, listen, you may disagree with the list. If you do, go ahead and leave something in the comments, or if you do agree with it, leave something there. If you'd like to hear more of these ranking episodes and then eventually episodes on a lot of different topics, go ahead and subscribe. If you have any ideas for topics, let us know about them. You can email Brody directly at brody@theinsanebrain.com. And we'll get into it. But the amount of stuff that he just has sitting right at his fingertips here, that's why they call him the Rain Man of Wrestling.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you for listening, and we look forward to having you back for the next episode.
Absolutely.
Take care.
Yeah, take care.